Fantastic, Dan. It is so nice to see you. It's wonderful to have you on my podcast today. You've had an incredible background, which I'm going to discuss here in a minute. For today's call, we'll cover, of course, what CCR Search does for our listeners. We'll review what we're covering topics-wise on the conversation. I'm going to cover your bio. We'll spend a few moments talking about what you're up to, and then we'll jump into a couple of the questions. So CCR Search, we're an executive search firm. We're really focused in on finding top talent for sales, marketing, finance, accounting, and construction. We have an exclusive relationship with another firm that's called JP Workman Group, and our firm actually has industry experts for each of our practices. And we pride ourselves on CCR, which stands for Candor, Credibility, and Reliability. Our weekly podcast includes speaking with industry experts like yourself, covering topics of spotting top talent and building cohesive teams. It is, again, an honor to have you with me. You are a dynamic leader. You have a very deep and strong background in HR, safety, and corporate communications, and in public, private, and private equity-backed companies across all business cycles. Dan was the CHRO at Reynolds Consumer Products, a $3 billion, 5,200 employees, 17 manufacturing facility organization. Dan oversaw an $80 million HR budget, facilitated 20% top-line growth and IPO readiness by driving operational and cultural integrations of acquired companies. To prepare the company for IPO, he orchestrated a highly complex separation from Rank Group, including acquisition of 2 facilities from some of the sister companies. He also strengthened corporate sustainability by establishing an ESG program and achieved a 91% retention rate of senior management staff with internal promotion rates in excess of 26% per year. Dan also was a VP of HR for Exide Technologies America's business unit, which at the time was a $1.2 billion, 4,200 employee, 14 manufacturing site company with a $35 million HR budget. Dan successfully consolidated 3 operating divisions into a single unit, led a major restructuring effort following the loss of the largest customer and 30% revenue decline, initiated organizational design changes to combine plants, reorganize staffing, and reorient commercial teams. You even directed the opening of a South American office and led the staffing for the Indian business, including hiring the general management and general manager over at those locations. Additionally, Dan also oversaw human resources while reporting to the chairman and CEO as chief administrative officer at Coleman Natural Foods. And Dan also serves as the chairman of the board and trustee for Twin City Bakery Workers Pension Health Welfare Funds and a trustee for Siouxland Community Health Center. I think you are really a wonderful person to have with me to cover the topics of building cohesive teams and selecting top talent with your immense experience. And I know you've been doing some exciting things on your own today outside of your past. So why don't you fill our listeners in on what you've been up to, Dan?
Well, Dan, thank you for that very nice invitation and bio review. I guess that goes back a long way. So thank you very much. I retired a little over a year ago from Reynolds, and since then have been doing executive coaching and executive partnering, both on my own and also with Executive Coaching Connections out of Chicago, which is just a great global firm, concentrating really almost exclusively on C-suite executives, both from a coaching standpoint and a partnering standpoint. And as I mentioned in our prior conversation, Dan, one of the things that I'm really focusing on is helping new executives move into different roles, especially if they have an opportunity that they're moving from one set of ownership structure, such as a publicly held company, into a family-owned or maybe private equity or privately owned, and helping them understand the nuances in those new organizational structures. And so it's been very fun. And again, ECC is a great group to work with. And they've been very, very nice to me in helping me introduce to new opportunities.
Fantastic. And, it kind of goes right into our first question of building cohesive teams, right? You've got to help these coaches, or you need to coach these individuals and help them in order to be very successful. And over your time, and even in your current world, I mean, how, maybe a couple tips or tricks on what you're doing from an HR standpoint. I know at Reynolds, you had 25 employees working that $80 million budget. How do you keep everything in sync, spot top talent, and then also, keep everyone kind of aligned to get pretty big goals accomplished year after year?
Sure. And I, not only at Reynolds, but at every opportunity I've had, these are kind of the core things that I thought about, which is first and foremost, and maybe it sounds, a little too simple, but the personnel that you have working for and around you is the key, right? And so getting that talent is really important, right? Building those teams so that they're able to perform at a really high level. One, you have to be clear about your strategy. And that, to me, is the most important part of deciding how you're going to recruit talent. If you're looking out on a timeline, say 2, 4, 6 years, thinking about what you're going to be doing in that time frame in building your organization and also building the company, there's going to be a shift in skill sets that you need along the way. And what you need that first year is going to provide the foundation and the base for what you need year 2, year 3, year 4. So you have to be really clear about what's really important that first 12, 18 months, and start to think about how you use that as the base to build on. The second part I think is so important in terms of building teams is you have to learn from the people you hire, right? You may have one particular expertise or a couple of things that you've really developed in your career, and you're a C-suite leader or a very senior executive, but you're hiring people and asking them to do things that maybe you're not precisely trained in or need to be better understanding what those things are. And I would tell you that understanding them, listening to them, learning from them is an amazing way to help build the cohesiveness of a team. They feel like they're a real contributor. And so I think that's a really important part. You value their input, you value their opinions, you make them feel like they're really part of the team, and they are, right? Mm-hmm. They're making a valuable contribution. And the third thing, and this is easy, right? But a lot of executives don't do it as much as I think they should. You got to promote their success. When you have people working for you that do great work and good things, you got to let everybody know. That gets back, that creates an aura of accountability, but also great satisfaction for your team members. And so I think those are really important steps to take when you're building an important team. The other thing that I would always remind C-suite executives of is they're also part of a team. And all of the things that I've just mentioned are just as important in their interaction with their peers. And so those lessons, I think, are invaluable for C-suite leaders.
That's great feedback. I'm curious, how do you promote people in HR, when they do great things? In being with my sales background, right? We close the deal, an email goes out to the company, so-and-so closed the deal. Pretty cut and dry on how you, champion salespeople, or they got into the new account or whatever it might be. But, for our HR listeners, I mean, how do you go about doing that to really make the HR team feel good and that they're going in the right direction?
I think there's a couple of things, Dan. One is maybe things that you measure a little differently, right? So are there staffing requirements? Are there those kinds of events in in their area of responsibility that they've done a really good job with. The other piece is, how have they made the people that they're working with in their business unit or the group that they're responsible for, how have they made them better? And if you can understand how to promote that type of success for your people through either their coaching or other steps that they've taken to help those business leaders be more successful, whether that's general managers, marketing people, whatever it is, that's a direct connection to that person's ability to affect the business in a really positive way. And I think the more chances you get to do that, the better that person feels about being part of your team.
That's great. Makes perfect sense. I'll segue us a little bit here too. You mentioned finding talent and working with organizations a little bit for talent acquisition. That's obviously a huge part of human resources. How do you go about building your talent acquisition plan, from having your internal team manage talent acquisition to maybe outside partners and recruiters externally to make it all come together and successfully recruit the thousands of people you've recruited over the years?
Whether it's internal or external resources that you're using for recruiting, those people really have to understand the strategy for the company and the role that they're hiring for, and what the particular skill sets and personal characteristics might be for somebody coming into that role. That's really important. Internally, I think you have a much better chance of reinforcing that time and time again with the people who do your internal recruiting. Externally, you have to find somebody who understands your business, who gets your culture, right? Every recruiter knows the X's and O's of business, right? The P&L, sales numbers, they get all of that, right? But in order to be successful in recruiting for your firm, they really have to get your culture. And that requires some time. Time with the head of HR, time with perhaps the CEO, but other very senior leaders who they get a chance to talk to. So they have a broader look at the company, as opposed to just, I'm going to hire a head of operations, right? And so I'm going to talk to the operations people. No, right? It's got to be a lot broader than that in order for them to understand your culture. And I think that's a really critical step in using an outside recruiter successfully.
Wow, that's okay. That's really interesting. So would you bridge those gaps and set those conversations up, or would you look for an outside partner kind of pushing for that and looking to have those conversations to really demonstrate and prove themselves as a partner that they want to understand your culture?
Let's take that second part of it, Dan.
Okay.
If I meet a recruiter who says, hey, can I talk to some other people in the company about what you guys are like? That's such a great spot to start from, right? Because listen, if you're going to recruit a VP of sales or a VP of marketing for a company, right? That strict function is fine, but what kind of person fits in that company, right? What's the culture like? Well, you're not going to learn it just in that narrow space there. You might want to talk to a finance or an operations or an HR person or some other people in the business, so that you have a broader look of what that company looks like, so that you can find the right person. You can find a lot of marketing people. They're great, right? And they may fit in 20% of the companies. Finding somebody that fits in the business that you've been hired to recruit for requires a really good understanding of the culture of that business, who else they're going to be working with, how they might fit in. And I think it's a really important part for recruiters to understand.
That is great feedback. That's very helpful for me personally.
Sure.
Really
right. And then the process part of it, you of course you're going to want to make sure that you're facilitating a really good arrangement between that executive recruiter and who their hiring manager is that they're working with. You want to be really diligent in talking to both of them separately, so that you always understand both perspectives of how the search is going and how things are progressing. And then, excuse me, and then I think that the other part of that is you have to have kind of a controlled urgency, right? It's not that your hair's on fire, but this is really important, right? Hiring people to work for somebody else and the job that they're going to do for that person, it's a really important thing. And maybe as important as anything else that they do is hiring the right people. And so you want to keep it on track. You want to make sure it's moving at the appropriate speed. Nobody loses track of it. The hiring manager doesn't get distracted by all of the 101 things that they have to do every day in their regular job. And so that I call it a bit of a controlled urgency, but I think that's really important also.
Wow, that's, yeah. There's so many moving parts all the time. And I never really understand how high-level executives can get it all done. And it sounds like so much of it comes down to strategy, building out your plan and sticking to your plan. And you mentioned that at the very beginning here of, your strategy to build cohesive teams. How do you carry that through across an entire year or multi-years, and then manage it up to the C-suite, and then also keep the pressure from rolling downhill to your team and flattening them?
Yeah, listen, and I've just an example of kind of culturally, I've worked in some different ownership settings, right? And some are for some people and some are not for some people, right? And you just have to really make sure you ferret that out, right? Some people are really comfortable moving into a more senior executive role in an established company with a host of resources and structure, and B follows A, on and on and on, right? If you're moving into maybe privately held, private equity, some other type of ownership structures, you're going to have to be really comfortable with a whole different set of parameters for how work gets done, what your business is like, who you're working with, who has an interest in what you're doing. It's really a change. And so, listen, when we were starting out at Reynolds, right, we had 3 different companies that we were putting together. It was quite an operation, quite a job, a bit chaotic at times, quite frankly. But one of the things that I told people that we were recruiting is, this is a unique opportunity for you to come in and put your stamp on something.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have a complete white sheet of paper to start on, but it wasn't far away, right? And so going back to talking about what the strategy was for the next 2-5 years and building your organization out towards that goal is really exciting to some people. Others it isn't, and that's fine. And it's not a knock on either set, but you have to make sure you know what you're hiring for in terms of having that skill set to be successful in that environment.
And that's ultimately why you need a good recruiter too, that understands your culture and what you're specifically looking for, because somebody that's phenomenal in a multiple resource environment may really struggle or be uncomfortable or not even be interested in an environment that's more startup but more exciting per se.
Yeah, and listen, it's really important to put those people in an environment, Dan, to be successful. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that understanding of that strategy and environment, you're probably not going to, as a recruiter, but also as an HR leader, mm-hmm. you're probably not going to be successful in getting the right talent in. And nothing sets you back more. You make a hire that isn't good, and I tend to shy away from the word bad hire, because that implies that somebody that you hired was a bad person or executive. That's not what I'm saying. But it's not a good hire because they weren't prepared to be successful in the environment that you put them in. And that falls on a lot of people. So
makes perfect sense. You know, as we come up here on time, and some of our listeners are, you know, looking to get to your role one day where they can get to the C-suite or VP of HR, maybe 2 or 3 top tricks for them, although you've shared a lot today, you know, that could really help them in their career.
I think first and foremost, Dan, you have to be comfortable with risk.
Okay.
There's nothing guaranteed about what happens tomorrow or next year. You have to be comfortable with risk, both from a professional and an organizational level. And I'm not talking about crazy off the chart stuff. I'm just talking about understanding that if you're a successful leader, you're going to be taking steps that have some risk to them, okay? In your hiring, in your strategy, in your execution of certain things. And you have to be comfortable with that. And if you are, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be really successful in getting done what you're trying to do. But if you're not comfortable with some risk in your professional career, it's a door blocker as far as I'm concerned. This is probably the most simple one. Know what you're good at.
Okay.
Right? Everybody came up through something, right? Maybe labor relations, maybe recruiting, maybe organizational development, whatever components of the HR world you came up in, you're probably really good at that. Well, you don't need great support in that area. You might in labor relations, you might in technology, you might in a whole host of, whether that's EH&S or other responsibilities that you get. You need to make sure you know what you need support in and really focus on getting the best talent in that areas and supporting yourself to be successful. Then I think in terms of the next 2 things that are most important, one, you create the environment for them to be successful. And we talked about that earlier in terms of, you know, recognizing their success and promoting them and that kind of thing. I think that's really important. And then get out of the way. If you've set the strategy, if you've hired the best people, you need to make sure you give them an opportunity to do their job at a high level. And they will. They absolutely will. If you've provided that kind of environment and you put them in a situation to be successful, they will be. And then that reflects well on the team, and it reflects well on the executive who created that kind of team. So
that's great. Keeps the engine running, builds those cohesive teams, leaves the door open to bring in great talent to fit your culture. You know, that all makes great sense. And Dan, I can't thank you enough. I've learned a lot today personally. So this has been very helpful. Really excited to share this with the listeners. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Dan, thank you, and good to see you again.
You too.